There are 10,000 ways to die in the 31st millennium, and not a single one of them is merciful. Across the galaxy, a million worlds bow to the golden dream of the Emperor of mankind. Yet even as his armies march in glorious conquest, something unseen gnaws at the edges of that dream. A shadow that has lingered since the dawn of time, patient, waiting, and hungry. The Age of Unity had promised salvation. Terra, once riven with techno-barbarians, warp cults, and endless war, now stood as the radiant throne world of a newborn Imperium. The Great Crusade surged outward in an unstoppable tide, spearheaded by the Primarchs, 20 sons forged of the Emperor's own genecraft. They were gods among men, warriors without equal, each leading a legion of genetically engineered space marines. Together, they had brought countless stars into the light of imperial truth. But perfection has a way of breeding cracks, and cracks, once formed, invite ruin. The tale begins not with thunder and fire, but with whispers, vox channels that carried more than orders, dreams touched by something unnatural, a sense among some legions that the Emperor himself had grown distant. Why had he withdrawn from the Great Crusade? Why had he left his chosen war master, Horus Heresy, to command in his place? To those who had shed blood and bone for the dream of unity, the silence of their father was more terrifying than any Xenos threat. And so, in the stillness between campaigns, seeds of doubt began to sprout. On the surface of compliance worlds, as imperial banners were raised high, certain captains found themselves questioning. A warrior of the Lunar Wolves might stare at his bolter, its ceramite casing scratched and blackened by decades of battle, and wonder, are we tools or sons? Are we expendable or eternal? Horus himself bore that burden most of all. The War Master, beloved, brilliant, charismatic beyond measure, had been the one chosen above all his brothers. Yet choice can wound as surely as it can honor. The first among equals found himself shouldering the envy of others, the mistrust of some, and the adoration of many. And when such pressure collides with the insidious temptations of the warp, the result is inevitable. The warp, the immaterium, the sea of souls, the raging storm that lies beneath reality. Humanity used it for faster-than-light travel, relying on psychers and navigators to pierce its madness. But to the primordial annihilator, the four great powers within that storm, mankind was not master, but prey. The Chaos Gods had waited, watching since before the birth of the Imperium. Now, with Horus as their chosen focus, their patience began to bear fruit. The early signs were subtle, a delay in communications here, a regiment vanishing into the warp without trace there, an entire compliance fleet arriving at its destination years late, crew aged beyond recognition. These were the common hazards of the galaxy, easily dismissed, but within the higher councils of the legions, doubt brewed. Was the Emperor's grand design truly unshakable, or was he too fallible? Amidst this, Horus fell, not in battle, but in body and spirit, wounded on the blasted moon of Davin. It was there, in the delirium of near death, that he encountered visions, not conjured by fate, but crafted by demonic will. They showed him futures of ruin, lies of betrayal, and promises of dominion.
They showed him a galaxy where he, Horus, was not just war master, but emperor in truth. And in that fevered haze, the first stone was cast. What followed would be the unraveling of everything mankind had built. In the quiet barracks of the sons of Horus, as oaths were sworn and blades honed, the cracks in the dream widened. Brothers whispered to brothers, captains held councils in shadowed chambers, and throughout it all, the name of the emperor grew more distant, while the name of Horus Lupercal burned brighter. This was the beginning of the greatest betrayal in human history. If you crave more tales from the dark millennium, then strike the subscribe rune upon your data slate and pledge loyalty to this channel. The Emperor protects those who strengthen the community. The dream of unity was about to be shattered, and the galaxy would drown in fire.
The Primarchs were the Emperor's greatest work, each a reflection of his boundless genius, yet each imperfect in their own way. For all their majesty, they were not gods, nor angels, but men given the strength of demiurges and the burdens of destiny. And like all men, they could be divided. In the years before the heresy, the legions had marched as one, their banners unfurled across the stars. Yet the appointment of Horus Lupercal as war master had planted a silent seed of rivalry. To some, he was the natural heir, the emperor's most beloved, the closest to humanity and the finest strategist among them. To others, he was a favored child, a reminder that even their father could play favorites. Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's children, admired Horus greatly, though his admiration masked a hunger of his own for perfection, for beauty, for recognition. Perturbo of the Iron Warriors seethed at being overlooked, his genius in siegecraft unacknowledged. Angron of the World Eaters had little interest in politics, but every interest in blood. And Lorgar of the Word-Bearers nursed the deepest wound of all, his faith in the Emperor crushed, his devotion twisted into heresy by gods more eager for worship. Horus knew these weaknesses, for he had grown beside his brothers in war and conquest. The Emperor had trusted him to lead, but trust can be a knife as easily as it is a gift. Slowly, carefully, Horus began to turn them, one by one, away from the light of Terra. The first whispers were framed as questions. Why does the Emperor leave us while he locks himself away upon the throne? Why does he abandon his sons, even as the galaxy still burns with Xenos defiance? To the proud, the bitter, the wounded, those questions festered. And then came the truth revealed on Davin. Horus, carried half dead from his ordeal, emerged changed. He told his brothers that the Emperor lied, that the dream of the Imperium was not for mankind, but for his own apotheosis, that the truth of the galaxy was far darker, and only those who stood with Horus could claim freedom. Fulgrim listened, eager for perfection unchained by imperial decree. Lorgar embraced the vision, seeing in Horus the vessel of divine will he had long craved. Angron followed not for reason, but because Horus offered him endless war without restraint. Even Mortarion, dour master of the Death Guard, was swayed, for the promises of strength against the warp's corruption sounded like salvation. But not all Primarchs turned. Rogal Dorn of the Imperial Fists answered Horus's call with suspicion, his loyalty to the throne unbreakable. Rabauti Guliman of the Ultramarines, ever the statesman, counseled patience. Jagatai Khan of the White Scars wrestled with doubt,
his heart torn between brotherhood and duty. And above all, Sanguinius, angelic and noble, stood as a beacon of loyalty, his sorrow for Horus matched only by his resolve to resist him. The galaxy itself became the battlefield of their divided wills. The word-bearers sowed cults across imperial space, spreading faith not in the Emperor, but in the primordial annihilator. The Alpha Legion infiltrated, subverted, misdirected, their allegiance unclear, their motives hidden even from their supposed allies. And the Night Lords turned entire systems into spectacles of terror, proving that loyalty to the War Master was written best in blood. The Emperor, meanwhile, grew silent still. He labored upon the Golden Throne, crafting a project none could understand. To the Primarchs, this absence was abandonment. To Horus, it was betrayal. And so, the lines of brotherhood became battle lines. It is said that when gods make war, mortals suffer most. Already the signs of the coming cataclysm could be felt. On garrison worlds, guardsmen noticed changes in their Astartes commanders, new symbols upon their armor, new words in their litanies. On the decks of void ships, navigators felt the warp boil with unseen hunger. And in the darkness between stars, cultists whispered that the age of the Emperor was ending. The stage was set. The War Master had drawn his brothers into his orbit, turning once loyal sons into instruments of rebellion. The Emperor had his loyalists still, but they were scattered, unprepared, uncertain of the scale of the betrayal. Brother would soon face brother. Legion would bleed legion. And in the fires of that division, the galaxy itself would be broken. Still with us in the shadows of treachery? Strike the like rune if you feel the weight of this betrayal heavy upon your soul.
The warp is a sea of madness. Sailors of the Imperium call it the immaterium, but words are poor armor against truth. It is not a place nor a dimension, but a reflection of thought and emotion made manifest. A storm of hungering will, shaped by the terrors and dreams of mortal minds. To those who glimpse it, sanity shatters. To those who embrace it, eternity whispers. The Emperor had always warned against its dangers. His imperial truth denied gods, denied superstition, denied the very notion of divine beings. And yet, within the warp, gods lived and thrived. 4 powers eternal, each a facet of mankind's most primal instincts: bloodshed, desire, change, and decay. For millennia, they had clawed at reality, seeking purchase in the mortal plane. The Great Crusade had denied them temples and faith, burning away the cults that fed them. But where faith is crushed, resentment takes root, and resentment is the richest soil for corruption. Horus Lupercal, War Master and chosen son, had become the linchpin of their design. His near death upon Davin was no accident of fate. It was a door opened, and once ajar, the gods pressed their claws inside. In his fever dreams, he had walked across futures. He had seen Terra burning. He had seen himself standing upon a throne of gold. And he had seen a galaxy united not in obedience to a silent emperor, but in loyalty to a war master who would listen.
Such visions came not only to Horus. Across the legions, psychers and dreamers began to mutter of strange omens. Librarians awoke screaming, their third eyes seared with images of fire and blood. Astropaths convulsed at their choir stations, voices overlapping with whispers in languages older than mankind. Even ordinary mortals, far from the currents of the warp, dreamed of rivers of blood and stars weeping ash. And then came the voices. On the edges of compliance worlds, mortal auxilia officers heard phantom orders, urging them to turn their lasguns upon their own commanders. Entire regiments swore that they had received directives signed by Terran authority, only for Vox records to reveal silence. In the void, ships lost to the warp re-emerged carrying passengers who claimed centuries had passed, yet their bodies bore no age. Among them, some had heard the promises of unseen powers and carried back whispers of worship. The word-bearers were the most willing heralds. Their Primarch Lorgar had already embraced the primordial truth, the revelation that the gods of the warp were not false idols but eternal powers. Where once he had built cathedrals to the Emperor, now he built temples to chaos. On distant worlds, shrines rose in secret, demons summoned beneath the veil of night, cults spreading their hooks into imperial institutions. What had begun as whispers was becoming a chorus. The Alpha Legion made use of this confusion with merciless precision. Alpharius and Omegon, the twin Hydra heads, cloaked their allegiance in mystery. They fed false orders into Vox channels, sowed conflicting intelligence, and replaced officers with perfect doubles. To Imperial commanders, it became impossible to tell loyalist from traitor. That uncertainty is itself a weapon, and in war, hesitation is death. Still, there were those who resisted the whispers. Roble Dorn tightened the defenses of Terra, shutting down unverified channels, purging his own ranks with brutal efficiency. The Ultramarines of Guilliman clung to discipline, burying themselves in duty as rumors clawed at their trust. And Sanguinius, the angelic Primarch, led his sons in rituals of honor, their faith not in gods but in brotherhood. But resistance was not immunity. Even the strongest heard the whispers. Even the loyal felt the unease. When entire worlds bent knee to Horus without a single shot fired, the loyalist commanders could not help but wonder, how far had the corruption already spread? For that is the true terror of the warp. Not its storms, nor its demons, but its ability to take what is human and make it monstrous. To twist loyalty into fanaticism, to turn love of a brother into hatred of a father. Soon these whispers would ignite into screams. Comment your thoughts below. Could the heresy ever have been avoided? Or was mankind always doomed to betray itself?
The Yishtvan system was a loyal jewel of the Imperium, until it became a graveyard. It began as a compliance campaign, a routine purge of rebellion. The War Master ordered detachments from several of his legions to bring the world of Yishtvan III into line. Among the forces sent were companies from the Sons of Horus, the Death Guard, the World Eaters, and the Emperor's Children. To the ordinary soldiers, it was nothing unusual. Rebellion was constant, and the legions were the hammer that struck it down. But Horus had already chosen Istvan III as the crucible of betrayal. Within those companies were men too loyal to the emperor to bend to Horus's will. Veterans of decades of campaigning, warriors whose oaths were carved in their very bones. They were inconvenient, dangerous, untrustworthy to the coming rebellion. And so, Horus made a decision. These men would be purged in fire. When the loyalist companies set foot on Istvan III, they expected open war with rebels. They did not expect orbital bombardment from their own fleets. The skies tore open with fire. Virus bombs fell like rain, their canisters bursting into pale mists that blanketed the cities. In moments, life itself began to dissolve. Grass withered into black husks, human flesh sloughed from bone, air became poison. The proud cities of Istvan melted into charnel pits, screaming voices carried away by the wind. And then came the firestorms, cyclonic torpedoes igniting the poisoned atmosphere until entire continents burned as pyres visible from orbit. It should have been the end. No one should have survived such a holocaust. But the Astartes are not so easily slain. In shattered cathedrals, beneath melted stone, loyalist survivors clawed their way into ruins and tunnels, their gene-forged bodies resisting where mortals had perished instantly. What had been intended as a swift annihilation became instead a war of survival. Among the Emperor's children, Captain Saul Tarvitz emerged as a symbol of defiance. Warned by whispers of treachery, he had acted quickly, sheltering men, rallying survivors, and voxing warnings across the blasted world. His actions saved thousands of loyal Astartes from annihilation. Tarvitz, once a dutiful soldier of Fulgrim's legion, now stood against his own Primarch, and for that he would be remembered. The survivors fought on amid the ruins. Death Guard, sons of Horus and Emperor's children who had refused to turn their oaths became brothers in arms, holding shattered hab-blocks against the traitor legions descending from orbit. The World Eaters, divided against themselves, tore up one another with chain axes, some in loyalty to Horus, others in devotion to the Emperor. The streets of Istvan III became a nightmare of brother killing brother, loyalty drowned in blood. And still, the virus clouds clung to the ruins, seeping into armor, corroding weapons. Medicae servitors worked tirelessly, their syringes hissing, trying to stabilize warriors coughing black ichor from lungs burned by toxins. Lay's guns sputtered in the ash-choked air. The earth itself groaned beneath the firestorms, cities collapsing into pits of molten stone. The Loyalists fought not only their brothers, but the very death world their commanders had made of Istvan III. In orbit, Horus watched, cold and unflinching. He had given the order without hesitation. To him, the purging of Loyalists was not cruelty, but necessity. His rebellion could not suffer doubters, and the galaxy would be reforged only by those who bent fully to his will. Yet even as he ordered fresh bombardments, reports filtered in. The Loyalists were not dead. They were holding. They were resisting. And in that resistance a legend was born. Tarvitz and his brothers fought not with hope of survival, but with defiance, to prove that loyalty was not so easily burned away. For months, the war dragged on amid the ashes of Istvan III. Traitor and loyalist clashed in endless ambushes, barricades, and sieges. Death was constant, but so was courage. Apothecaries carved open ruined flesh and forced gene seed into safekeeping. Chaplains carried litanies of defiance to men choking on poison. and every ruined street echoed with the fury of space marines who would not bow. When finally the traitor legions brought overwhelming firepower to bear, scouring the last bastions of resistance, it was not victory Horus claimed. It was proof that even in the face of annihilation, loyalty endured. Istvan III was reduced to ash, but its story was written in the blood of heroes. The galaxy had seen the first act of the heresy's open war. Brother had slaughtered brother, Primarchs had betrayed their sons, and the Emperor's silence loomed heavier than ever. Still listening through the firestorms? Subscribe now to hold the line with us, for in the heresy, the battle is only just beginning.
The ashes of Istvan III did not settle quietly. They spread like a contagion, carried by survivors, by whispers, by dread. Every legion, every fleet, every regiment of mortal soldiery now faced the same impossible question: where does my loyalty truly lie? For the Astartes, loyalty had always been simple. They were bred for obedience, conditioned to follow their Primarchs, their gene fathers, without question. But now those fathers had divided. Horus, Fulgrim, Mortarion, Angron, and Lorgar had turned from the throne. Rogel Dorn, Guilliman, Sanguinius, and the others still stood as bulwarks of loyalty. The lines were drawn not by reason, not by philosophy, but by blood. The loyalist's dilemma was this: to whom does a warrior owe his soul? To the Emperor, the distant father of humanity, enthroned upon Terra in silence? Or to the Primarch who had led him through fire, who had bled beside him, who had raised him as a son? On warships across the stars, debates tore companies apart. In the mess halls of the Imperial army, officers argued whether Horus was savior or heretic. Entire regiments split, lasguns raised against comrades they had marched with for decades. The schism was no longer distant. It was immediate, personal, visceral. Among the Death Guard, Captain Nathaniel Garro wrestled with the weight of impossible choice. His Primarch, Mortarion, had sworn to Horus, but Garro felt in his bones that the Emperor's light still guided him. To remain with his legion was to walk the path of treachery. To turn away was to abandon brothers he loved. And yet he chose. He seized a frigate, the Eisenstein, and carried word of the War Master's betrayal across the warp. His journey was one of desperation, a lone vessel fleeing an entire galaxy of traitors. But his choice gave Terra its first warning of the coming storm. Others made their stand differently. Saul Tarvitz had already chosen defiance at Istvan III, leading doomed warriors in the ashes of betrayal. Captain Rylanor of the Emperor's Children, a dreadnought entombed in ceramite for centuries, stood immovable against his corrupted legion, his vox booming hymns of loyalty even as traitors clawed at his sarcophagus. Each act of resistance became a beacon, however faint, in the growing dark. But there were as many who chose the other path. Fabius Bile, once apothecary of the Emperor's Children, cast aside all restraint, seeing in Horus's rebellion a chance to indulge his grotesque experiments. The World Eaters turned on one another, until only the berserkers loyal to Angron remained. Even within the Imperial army, millions bent knee to the War Master, seduced by his promise of freedom from Terra's tyranny. For the common man, the dilemma was no less cruel. A guardsman sworn to his commander might find that commander now wore the eye of Horus on his armor. A navigator might see her house swear to the War Master, even as her blood cried out for the Emperor.
Loyalty became a death sentence no matter which side one chose. And the warp amplified it all. Dreams of betrayal plagued the loyal, visions of victory seduced the traitors. Demons whispered in the shadows of the void, urging mortals to strike at their brothers before their brothers struck first. Paranoia spread faster than truth. On some ships, entire decks fell silent, voided of life after mutiny and purge. On others, commanders trusted too long, and woke with knives in their throats. Through it all, the Emperor remained silent. His work upon Terra consumed him, his mind fixed upon the golden throne, upon mysteries none but he could comprehend. To the Loyalists, his silence was a trial of faith. To the traitors, it was proof of abandonment. The Loyalists' dilemma was never truly answered. Each warrior, each mortal, each fleet and legion made its choice alone, and the cost was always blood. This was the true horror of the heresy. Not vast fleets clashing in the void, not titans waging war across continents, but the moment a man turned upon his brother and believed he was right. The galaxy trembled as the traitors gathered for their next blow, and on Istvan V, the hammer was about to fall. Still holding the line with us? Subscribe now and comment below which moment of loyalty or betrayal you think changed the heresy most.
The black sands of Istvan V would drink more blood than any world before it. Where Istvan III had been a purge, a test of loyalty, the battle for Istvan V was a massacre calculated with precision. The War Master had gathered his legions, sons of Horus, emperors' children, Death Guard, and World Eaters, to make open war. In reply, the Emperor dispatched 7 legions to crush the rebellion before it spread further. It should have been overwhelming force, a hammer blow to end the treachery in its infancy. But Horus was no fool. He had prepared a trap worthy of his title as War Master. The Loyalist legions who answered the call were proud and fearless. The Iron Hands under Ferrus Manus, the Salamanders under Vulcan, and the Raven Guard under Corvus Corax led the vanguard. Behind them marched the Iron Warriors of Perturbaro, the Night Lords of Conrad Kurz, the Word Bearers of Lorgar, and the Alpha Legion of Alfarius. It was a host vast enough to break worlds, but half of it already belonged to Horus. The Drop Site Massacre, as it would be named, began with courage and ended in betrayal. From orbit, the Loyalists descended upon the blackened plains of Istvan V, drop pods screaming through the atmosphere, thunderhawks braving storms of fire. They struck hard, and for a moment, victory seemed possible. Ferrus Manus led the Iron Hands like a god of war, his hammer forgebreaker crushing traitor marines in showers of ceramite and bone. Vulcan strode like a titan of flame, his sons unleashing purifying fire upon their corrupted brethren. Corax's Raven Guard struck with surgical precision, descending from the shadows, their blades cutting through the traitor lines. The initial assault was glorious. Entire battalions of the Sons of Horus reeled under the fury of the Loyalists. Mortarian's Death Guard staggered. Angron himself was driven back by the sheer ferocity of Vulcan's strike. The traitors appeared cornered, outnumbered, overwhelmed. For a heartbeat, hope flickered. And then the signal came. Perturbaro turned his guns not upon Horus's armies, but upon his supposed allies. The Iron Warriors unleashed firestorms into the backs of their brothers. The Night Lords fell upon the Raven Guard with chainswords shrieking, their voxcasters blaring screams to spread panic. The Word Bearers chanted hymns not of the Emperor, but of the gods of the warp, their blades drenched in loyalist blood. The Alpha Legion revealed its fangs at last, sowing confusion so complete that loyalist commanders did not know who their enemies were until the knives were already in their spines. The massacre was absolute. Ferrus Manus charged into the fray, desperate to slay Fulgrim, his once beloved brother. The duel was titanic, hammer against blade, loyalty against corruption. In the end, Fulgrim's demon blade struck true, and Ferrus Manus fell. His head severed, his legion's morale shattered. Vulcan fought with unyielding fire, but for every traitor he slew, another rose to take its place. Corax led his sons in desperate retreats, wings of black against a sea of red, but even he could not outfly the tide of treachery. The black sands turned crimson. Drop pods became coffins. Medicae shelters were overrun, their patients butchered where they lay. Entire companies of salamanders were scoured from existence by orbital bombardments, their corpses left smoking in craters. The Iron Hands broke themselves on the anvil of betrayal, their grief matched only by their fury. The Raven Guard, torn apart by Night Lord ambushes, became shadows fleeing across a plain of corpses. It was slaughter, pure and calculated. And above it all, Horus watched from his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. He had torn the heart from the loyalist legions, crippling 3 Primarchs' hosts in a single orchestrated blow. From that day onward, the galaxy would know that the rebellion was not rumor, not shadow, but war. Yet even in massacre, survival bred defiance. Corax, battered and broken, escaped with a fraction of his sons. Vulcan was captured, his fate twisted by the darkness of his captors. And the shattered remnants of the Iron Hands carried their grief back to Terra, vowing vengeance for their fallen father. The drop site massacre was not merely a battle, it was the death knell of innocence. Brother had slaughtered brother openly, and now the galaxy understood. The heresy was real, and it would consume everything. The fires of Istvan V lit the path to Terra itself. The tension builds. Subscribe to stand with the Loyalists as we march deeper into the heresy.
The drop site massacre shattered more than legions. It shattered trust itself. Across the Imperium, news of Istvan V spread like wildfire. At first whispers, garbled astropathic signals, fragmented distress calls, panicked reports of loyalist forces butchered by those who had marched beside them. Then came confirmation, grim and undeniable. Ferrus Manus dead, the Salandras broken, the Raven Guard fleeing through the void like hunted prey. The galaxy trembled. If betrayal could run that deep, if 7 legions could turn in secret and strike so precisely, then no oaths, no bonds, no vows were safe. This was the age of shadows. The traitor Primarchs scattered, each carving their own path through blood and fire, each furthering Horus's rebellion in their own way. The Night Lords became predators of the void, terror incarnate, spreading panic through massacres designed less for conquest than for despair. Worlds fell not through battle, but through paralysis, their defenders crushed by fear before a single blade was drawn. The Alpha Legion wove deeper into the fabric of the Imperium, planting operatives, sowing disinformation, and leaving entire systems paralyzed by doubt. Was that order truly from Terra or from Alpharius? Was that commander a loyal servant of the throne or a sleeper agent awaiting the signal to strike? Every shadow became a threat. Every friend could be an enemy.
Meanwhile, the word-bearers fanned the flames of heresy. Lorgar, once chastised at Monarchia, now unleashed a crusade not of faith in the Emperor, but of worship to the dark gods. Cults rose in hive cities and manufactoriums, whispering prayers not to Terra, but to the Imperium. Entire worlds turned overnight, banners of the Aquila torn down and replaced with the sigils of the warp. And where faith took root, demons followed, slipping through the cracks of reality to walk among men. The Iron Warriors tightened their grip on fortresses, Perturbaru reveling in sieges that broke the back of loyalist resistance. Ongron and his World Eaters cut bloody paths through the stars, their rage unbound, their chain axes singing symphonies of slaughter. Mortarion spread pestilence and despair, his fleets leaving behind only worlds of rot and ruin. But treachery was not the sole weapon of the traitors. It spread, insidious, into the minds of the loyalists. Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, received word of the massacre and steeled his heart for the defense of the throne world. He fortified walls, raised armies, and prepared for the storm. But even he could not silence the doubts. Who else would betray them? Which brothers would stand firm, and which would sell their souls to Horus? Gilman and the Ultramarines found themselves trapped in the far reaches of Ultramar, cut off from Terra by the treachery of the Ruin Storm, a warp storm so vast and unnatural that it severed half the galaxy from the other. Was it chance or design? None could say. What mattered was that aid from Ultramar would not come in time. And in the midst of it all, Sanguinius, the angel, became a symbol of hope. His legion, the Blood Angels, stood as paragons of loyalty, their Primarchs' nobility unshaken even as the galaxy burned. To many, it was his light, not Terra's silence, that kept the dream of the Imperium alive. Yet even Sanguinius carried a shadow, for he had foreseen his fate. In dreams he saw wings broken, blood spilled, and Horus waiting upon a golden throne of ruin. Still, he did not falter. The heresy had entered its cruelest phase, the age where trust was ash, where every fleet wondered if its reinforcements were truly allies, where every commander questioned whether his own men might turn their bolters upon him. The shadows of treachery stretched across the galaxy, and in their depths, Horus tightened his grip. The march towards Terra had begun. Stand with the Emperor or fall to the War Master. Subscribe now and let me know in the comments which traitor Primarch's betrayal cut the deepest for you.
The galaxy reeled under the weight of betrayal, but in the ruins of countless worlds, another kind of war took shape. The War of Giants. Not just legions of Astartes, not just mortal armies pressed into service, but titanic engines of war whose footsteps shook continents. The Titan legions had awoken. On forge worlds across the Imperium, the Collegia Titanica stirred as news of the heresy reached the Mechanicum. What should have been an unbreakable bulwark fractured like everything else in this age of treachery. Some Titan legions remained steadfast, their god machines marching under the banners of the Emperor. Others turned to Horus, their oaths abandoned, their plasma hearts burning with the fire of rebellion. And some, most terrifying of all, were twisted into demonic parodies of themselves, once proud war machines now howling with warp-forged hunger, their machine spirits enslaved to chaos. This was the Titanomachia, the war of gods upon the earth. Picture the plains of Paramar, where loyalist warlord titans formed defensive lines against traitor reavers and corrupted warhounds. The ground cracked beneath their colossal strides, buildings flattened not by artillery, but by the mere shock waves of their weapons' fire. A single volley of plasma annihilated regiments of mortal men, while void shields shimmered and flared like suns being born and dying in the same instant. For the soldiers on the ground, the Titans were no longer weapons. They were forces of nature, beyond comprehension, beyond resistance. To fight near them was to court annihilation with every step. In orbit above Mars, the schism of the Mechanicum raged. Fabricator General Kelbor Hall, corrupted by Horus's promises, threw the power of the Red Planet behind the rebellion. Titan battled Titan across the sacred sands of Olympus Mons, god engines firing into the very manufactoria that had birthed them. The sky turned red with firestorms as Mars became a battlefield of steel and betrayal, a war whose echoes would scar the Imperium forever. Even the knights, the smaller cousins of the Titans, were drawn into the slaughter. Entire noble houses fractured, brothers dueling brothers in duels that toppled cities. Some marched proudly alongside loyalist Titans, their banners defiant against the storm. Others gave themselves willingly to Horus, their knight suits twisted into armored shells for demonic possession. But beyond the spectacle of the Titanomachia lay its true horror, the devastation it wrought upon mankind. Civilian populations were crushed beneath collapsing hives, their lives snuffed out by tremors and firestorms from battles they could neither understand nor escape. Refugees poured into void ships, their prayers frantic, begging the Emperor for salvation. But salvation was far away, and Horus's shadow grew closer with every passing day. In this new phase of the heresy, the Loyalists faced not only traitor legions, but also the terrifying reality that their own most powerful weapons could be turned against them. A Titan in rebellion was more than a threat. It was a nightmare that could not be easily stopped. Even Astartes' companies were but insects before such engines of death. The Loyalists learned to adapt. Rogel Dawn fortified Terra with bunkers deep enough to withstand the tread of Titans, his genius building defenses that might hold for a time. Loyalist Titan legions swore oaths stronger than steel, preparing to stand against their corrupted kin. And the surviving legions, the battered remnants of the Raven Guard, the Salamanders and others, began to learn the art of guerrilla warfare, striking swiftly and avoiding the wrath of the towering god machines. Still, the War of Titans carried a deeper meaning. It was not just the clash of metal giants, but the embodiment of the heresy itself. Brother against brother, oath against oath, the greatest creations of mankind perverted by corruption. Horus knew the truth. When Titans fell, worlds fell with them. Every god engine he claimed for the rebellion brought him one step closer to Terra. Every Titan that died in fire weakened the Emperor's arsenal. And though the Emperor still reigned on his golden throne, his silence was deafening. His subjects bled and burned, and the question that gnawed at them was not if Horus would come, but when. The ground quaked, the void flared,
and the Titanomachia raged on, heralding the end of all things. Still following this tale through fire and thunder? Strike that like button now. Your support strengthens the defenses of the channel, just as the Emperor's armies steel themselves for the coming siege.
In the shadow of titans and the betrayal of legions, there lay the true heart of the heresy, mankind itself. For while the Primarchs clashed and the Astartes waged their brutal wars, it was the uncounted billions of ordinary humans who bore the brunt of the devastation. Hive cities became battlefields, manufactorums turned into fortresses, and entire worlds became charnel pits, their populations caught in the crossfire of gods and monsters. Take the world of Kalf, once a shining jewel of Ultramar, its skies burned with the fury of orbital bombardments unleashed by the word-bearers. Whole continents boiled away under plasma fire. Civilians who had lived in peace for centuries were dragged from their hab blocks, conscripted at gunpoint, and handed lasguns with barely a word of training. The lucky ones died quickly. The others endured weeks of terror, hunted through the ruins by legionaries who regarded them as less than vermin. Elsewhere, on countless agri-worlds, the wars of supply became wars of survival. Fields that once fed billions were trampled into mud beneath the boots of armies. Entire populations starved when traitor fleets burned their granaries. The loyal and the treacherous alike learned the same cruel lesson. In the 31st millennium, hunger kills as surely as bolter fire. But worse than death was the corruption. The word-bearers and their cults infected the hearts of men faster than any plague. Priests, once the voices of imperial truth, now whispered promises of dark gods. Vox networks that should have carried orders were flooded with liturgies of heresy. Families turned against one another. In the depths of hive cities, demons crawled through breaches in reality, birthed by the faith of the desperate and the damned. The Astra Militarum, then still known as the Imperial Army, fought valiantly, but they were not built for this kind of war. Against the transhuman might of traitor legions, mortals died in droves. They set up barricades, manned heavy bolters, unleashed squadrons of Leman Russ tanks, and still they were crushed beneath the ceramite boots of their former heroes. Yet even so, some regiments earned their place in legend. On the world of Uront, the 11th Harrowers held for 13 days against the Emperor's children. Their officers were slaughtered in the first assault, their armor obliterated, but the soldiers dug in with trench knives and las pistols. They fought block by block, room by room, until only a few hundred remained. They knew no reinforcement would come, yet they fought on, not for victory, but to deny Fulgrim's sons their prize for one day longer. This was the tragedy of mankind in the heresy, heroism without hope, the greatest sacrifice of billions who would never be remembered, overshadowed by the titanic struggles of Primarchs. For every Ferus Manus who fell in glory, 1,000,000 nameless guardsmen perished in silence, their deaths unrecorded, their loyalty unacknowledged. And yet it was their suffering that truly revealed the scale of the heresy. It was not a war only of legions, but a civil war of humanity itself. Brother fought brother, city turned upon city, faith shattered and reforged in the fires of despair. The Mechanicum Schism ensured that entire planetary populations were enslaved to feed the forges of Mars. The Ruin Storm cut off whole sectors, trapping billions in isolation as traitors descended upon them like wolves. On some worlds, resistance was crushed swiftly. On others, brutal insurgencies dragged on for years, loyalist cells refusing to surrender even when their masters had abandoned them. For the common man of the Imperium, there was no clarity, no grand design. There were only rumors of betrayal, half-heard tales of gods and giants, and the daily struggle to survive. They could not know the destiny of Primarchs. They could only pray, and in those prayers, chaos listened. Perhaps that was the greatest cruelty of all. For every world that held fast, another broke. For every family that clung to the Emperor's name, another whispered instead to the dark gods, hoping for mercy that never came. The heresy was not fought only in the stars, it was fought in the streets, in the homes, in the hearts of men and women who never chose it. And as Horus gathered his strength for terror, humanity bled for him. Still holding strong through the carnage? Stand tall with the channel, subscribe and share your thoughts below. Could the Imperium have survived without the sacrifice of its uncounted billions? Among all the loyal sons of the Emperor, none bore their burdens with more dignity than Sanguinius and his blood angels. They were warriors of unmatched grace, noble even in the bloodiest battlefield. Angelic visages leading mortal armies who looked upon them as living avatars of hope. Yet beneath their shining surface a shadow stirred, the red thirst, a flaw written into their very gene seed, an unquenchable hunger for blood and carnage that threatened to consume them. The heresy sharpened that curse into a blade poised over their necks. When word of Istvan reached them, when the scale of Horus's betrayal was laid bare, Sanguinius gathered his sons and spoke with solemn calm. His voice carried like a hymn, gentle and strong, as he reminded them that loyalty was not simply obedience, but sacrifice. He knew his legion was tormented by their flaw. He knew that in the crucible of war they risked losing themselves to the very savagery they despised, but his faith in them was unshakable. And in him they saw not just a Primarch, but an anchor against the storm. Their greatest test came upon Cygnus Prime. Horus, with cunning malice, lured the blood angels into a trap designed not to kill them outright, but to corrupt them utterly. The War Master seeded the system with daemons and whispers, warping reality itself into a theater of madness. When the blood angels arrived, they found a world already consumed by chaos. The sky burned with unnatural fire, rivers ran black with blood, and daemons in countless forms awaited them. The battles that followed were unlike any they had fought before. The blood angels met daemons blade to claw, bolter to fang, holding their lines even as the Imperium itself screamed around them. Sanguinius led from the front, his wings ablaze with light as he struck down monstrosities that would have driven mortals to insanity at a glance. His very presence was a beacon, keeping his sons from falling fully into the bloodlust clawing at their souls. But the trap was deeper still. Horus had unleashed Kabanda, a bloodthirster of terrifying power, whose mission was simple: break the angel. When Sanguinius and Kabanda met, the clash was a vision of myth. Steel and demon weapons sang against one another,
each blow shaking the ground, each strike sending shockwaves through the warp-scarred air. Sanguinius fought with desperate valor, his skill unmatched, his blade singing through the demon's hide, yet even the angel was not invincible. Gabonda's axe struck true, shattering Sanguinius's legs and casting him broken upon the earth. The Blood Angels saw their father fall, and for a moment the abyss yawned wide. Their red thirst surged, the taste of their Primarch's blood driving them to the brink of madness. They became beasts in that hour, tearing through daemons with a ferocity that no mortal could withstand. It was slaughter unchained, a vision of what they might become if the curse ever fully consumed them. And yet Sanguinius endured. Crawling, broken, but unbowed, he rose once more. His voice cut through the madness, calling his sons back from the brink. Even crippled, he radiated a purity that the warp itself recoiled from. His defiance denied Gabonda total victory, and the Blood Angels withdrew, scarred but unbroken. The Cygnus trap revealed the cruel truth. Horus did not seek only to destroy the Emperor's sons. He sought to corrupt them, to twist them into weapons against their father. Had the Blood Angels succumbed, Terra itself might have been breached from within by demonic allies clad in crimson armor. That they resisted was a testament not only to their loyalty, but to the will of Sanguinius himself. In the aftermath, the Blood Angels carried their curse more heavily than ever. Each warrior knew the red thirst lurked within, each feared the moment it might overtake them. But they did not falter. They swore to fight no matter the cost, for they had seen what failure would mean, and they refused to give Horus that triumph. Thus the angels' legion stood tested by the warp, and though they bled, they endured. Sanguinius bore his wounds with quiet grace, never speaking of the visions he carried, visions of his inevitable fate. The Blood Angels emerged from Cygnus crime as more than warriors. They were survivors of temptation itself, tempered in the fires of betrayal. And they would carry that strength all the way to Terra, to the walls of the Imperial Palace, where their destiny awaited. Still with us in the shadow of angels and daemons, give this tale your strength. Drop a like and share below. Could any other Primarch have resisted Horus's trap as Sanguinius did?
At last, the storm broke. When Horus's fleets emerged into the Sol system, it was as though the sky itself tore open. Warp storms howled as demon lightning split the void, and entire battle groups of traitor vessels surged forward in a tide of twisted steel. The once proud warships of the legions were now grotesque silhouettes, bristling with cannons, their hulls alive with writhing glyphs of chaos. Towering battleships the size of continents blotted out the stars, accompanied by swarms of escorts, demon craft, and the titanic war engines of the Dark Mechanicum. The siege of Terra had begun. The void became the first battlefield. The Imperial Navy, bloodied but resolute, threw itself into the teeth of the War Master's assault. Every orbital platform fired until its reactors burned out. Entire fleets died in silence, their sacrifices measured only in the brief delays they bought. The Phalanx, fortress ship of the Imperial Fists, carved swaths through traitor armadas, its guns blazing like the wrath of gods. Yet for every victory, 10 defeats followed. Horus had brought numbers and power beyond reckoning, and slowly but surely, the Loyalists were driven back. Then, the bombardment began.
From orbit, the traitor legions unleashed hell upon Terra. Entire hive cities crumbled as macro-cannon fire rained from the heavens. Volcano cannons of corrupted titans cracked the crust of the throne world. Billions died before the first traitor boot touched the soil. The void above burned red, and the air itself turned to ash. And still, Dorne's defenses held. The Imperial Palace loomed like a mountain range of steel and adamantium, its walls layered with bastions, redoubts, and kill zones. The custodian guard manned the highest ramparts, their golden armor gleaming like beacons in the storm. Space Marines of the Imperial Fists, Blood Angels, and scattered survivors of shattered legions took their places in the trenches, their bolters ready, their oaths sworn. The Sisters of Silence stalked the halls, their mere presence snuffing out the demonic whispers that clawed at mortal minds. And behind it all, billions of mortal soldiers, ordinary men and women, dug in, their lasguns trembling in hands that still refused to drop them. When the first waves of the traitors landed, the ground shook. The sons of Horus spearheaded the assault, their once noble green now blackened and sickly. They were followed by the World Eaters, their frothing berserkers charging into the teeth of lasgun fire, their chain axes roaring in praise of corn. The Death Guard advanced like a plague, their bolters spewing corruption that rotted flesh and steel alike. Word-bearers chanted litanies as they summoned demons into the very heart of the battlefield, the air thick with claws and screams. And the Loyalists answered with fire. Orbital batteries flayed landing craft from the skies. Volcano cannons tore through Titans in single shots. The air was a storm of tracer fire, missile trails, and psychic lightning. For every breach the traitors made, Dorne's forces counterattacked with precision, sealing the wound with blood and steel. The fighting was apocalyptic. Streets became rivers of gore. Gardens and temples of terror were ground into mud beneath tank treads. Titans clashed with deafening fury, their steps collapsing hab blocks as they were made of paper. Demons tore reality open, only to be banished by custodian blades. Mortals, too small to even comprehend the scale of what they faced, stood shoulder to shoulder with Astartes, dying in their millions but slowing the tide by inches. And yet, despite their valor, the walls began to crack. Horus had all the time in the galaxy, and he pressed his advantage with ruthless patience. Every hour another bastion fell. Every day another section of wall was reduced to rubble. The traitors bled freely, but they did not stop. Terra became a charnel world, its soil saturated with death. Amid the slaughter, the loyalist Primarchs fought like demigods. Rogal Dorn stood upon the walls, his voice carrying above the thunder, directing every counterstrike with iron discipline. Sanguinius, angel of Baal, soared through the air, his wings a blur of white as he led desperate charges, cutting down champions of chaos with his blade of light. Even Jagatai Khan, swift lord of the White Scars, carved lightning paths through enemy lines, his jet bikes leaving trails of fire and blood in their wake. But one figure remained absent. The Emperor still sat on the golden throne, silent, immovable, and unseen. His children fought and died in his name, but his hand did not rise. Some whispered he was preparing for a moment beyond their comprehension. Others whispered he was already gone. The siege was not a battle. It was an apocalypse, and Terra itself groaned beneath its weight. The walls are shaking now, friends. If the clash of gods has gripped you, strike the like button and comment which legion would you stand with in the siege, loyalist or traitor.
The galaxy burned, and the wolves were unleashed. Of all the Emperor's sons, Leman Russ had long been both executioner and outcast. To the legions, the Space Wolves were feared as the Emperor's black hand, sent to do what others would not. The culling of disobedient worlds, the silencing of rival Primarchs, the punishment of pride. Where the wolves marched, annihilation followed, and no one mistook their arrival for diplomacy. When the heresy erupted, Russ and his legion stood ready. The Space Wolves had always distrusted Horus's charm, always snarled at the notion that the War Master could rule them like tamed hounds. Yet they were not unleashed immediately against Horus. Instead, the Emperor had given Russ another, darker command, one that would forever stain his name in the annals of the heresy. The order was Prospero. Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, had dared to breach the Emperor's edict against sorcery, casting his psychic message across the warp in an attempt to warn his father of Horus's betrayal. The Emperor's reaction was not gratitude, but wrath. For Magnus, in his desperation, had not only revealed Horus's treachery, he had also torn open the wards around the Imperial Webway project, endangering the Imperium itself. The cost of that act was beyond measure, and the Emperor decreed his son's punishment. And so, the wolves came. The Space Wolves descended upon Prospero like a storm of iron and fire. Their fleets unleashed bombardments that set the jewel-like cities aflame. Their warriors poured into the streets, their howls echoing above the screams of scholars, librarians, and sorcerers. The Thousand Suns fought with desperate brilliance, their psychic powers blazing, turning whole companies of wolves to ash in seconds. Yet for every space wolf that fell, 3 more surged forward, their fury unrelenting, their loyalty absolute. At the heart of the devastation, Russ and Magnus met. The Wolf King and the Crimson King, brothers bound by blood and now severed by destiny. Their duel shook the city of Tisca itself, a clash of raw psychic might against savage martial power. Magnus fought with all his sorcerous mastery, his blade a shard of the warp itself, his words pleading for understanding even as he struck. Russ answered not with words, but with the feral strength of the All-Father's executioner. The stories say that Russ wept as he fought, though no one could hear him above the thunder. For in his heart he knew Magnus had not truly turned traitor. He was guilty of arrogance, yes, and disobedience, but Horus was the true enemy, not the Crimson King. Yet orders were orders, and Russ was nothing if not the Emperor's hound. The end came brutally. Russ shattered Magnus's body, breaking his brother across his knee. The Crimson King's cry echoed through the warp as he fled into the Imperium, broken in body and spirit, carrying his legion with him into exile. Prospero burned, its libraries reduced to cinders, its people slaughtered or scattered to the void. The wolves had done their duty, but it left them hollow. For though they had been unleashed to destroy sorcery, they in truth had driven another of the Emperor's sons into the arms of chaos. Russ had slain his brother not for treachery, but for love of forbidden knowledge. It was a wound the Wolf King would never forgive himself for. And yet, the heresy demanded more. With Prospero in ruins, the Space Wolves turned their eyes to the greater war. Russ swore vengeance upon Horus for his manipulation, vowing to bring the War Master down with his own claws and fangs. His legion, bloodied but unbroken, would hunt traitors through the void, their fury unending, their loyalty absolute. But whispers lingered. Some said the emperor had not ordered Prospero's destruction, that Horus himself had twisted the message, turning brother against brother with poisoned words. If true, then Russ had been deceived, his loyalty weaponized into fratricide. The bitterness of that possibility gnawed at him in silence, even as his warriors raised their bolters to the stars. The wolves were unleashed, but even wolves can be wounded by guilt. And Leman Russ carried a wound deeper than any blade could give. The galaxy awaited the reckoning that only the Wolf King could bring. Still stalking through the flames with us? Strike the like button and tell me in the comments, was Russ a dutiful son obeying orders, or a pawn who damned his brother by mistake?
The war dragged on, and the shadows thickened. Entire sectors lay in ruin, burned out husks where once the Emperor's light had shone. Loyalist fleets retreated deeper into the Imperium. Traitor legions tightened their grip on conquered worlds. And across the stars the whispers grew louder. Terror itself would be the prize. The siege was drawing near. Horus had gathered his strength. From the ashes of Istvan and the poisoned skies of Kauth, from the demon-haunted ruins of Cygnus and the shattered towers of Prospero, the War Master built an army unlike any seen before. The traitor legions, now hardened by bloodshed and bound by corruption, rallied under his banner. Titans twisted by the warp strode beside them, their hulls alive with screaming faces. The Mechanicum of Mars, divided and bleeding, bent their forges to his will. And from the Imperium itself came allies no Primarch should ever have courted. Daemons, monstrous and countless, eager to spill mortal blood in the material realm. The Loyalists were no less determined. Rogel Dawn, Praetorian of Terror, became the pillar upon which the Emperor's hope rested. With unyielding precision, Dawn fortified the palace on the throne world. He turned its walls into mountains of steel, its bastions into killing grounds, its gates into mazes of death. The imperial palace was not merely a fortress, it was to be the bulwark of mankind's survival, a citadel against which even the gods themselves would bleed. Dawn commanded billions, the remnants of the imperial army, the Legio Custodes, Sisters of Silence, and scattered loyalist Astartes. Every artisan, every worker, every mortal man and woman of Terra was pressed into labor, building defenses that might hold against the storm. The skies were filled with orbital platforms, their guns primed. The void beyond was patrolled by the battered but unbroken fleets of the Loyalist legions. And within the palace itself, the Emperor sat on the golden throne, silent and immovable, channeling his power into the Webway project, even as the galaxy collapsed around him. But silence breeds fear. The Emperor did not speak to his people. His reasons, known only to a few, were hidden beneath layers of secrecy. To the masses, he seemed distant, even uncaring as his children slaughtered each other across the stars. Many whispered that perhaps he had already abandoned them, or that his silence was proof of his death. Dawn bore these doubts heavily, yet his resolve never cracked. If the Emperor's will was silence, then Dawn would be his voice, his fist, his unbreakable wall.
The traitor's approach was heralded by calamity. Warp storms raged across the void, isolating Terra from much of the Imperium. Astropathic choirs screamed as their minds were scoured by demonic interference. Vox signals became static, navigation became perilous, and fear grew with every passing day. The citizens of Terra lived beneath banners proclaiming loyalty, but beneath those banners came hunger, rationing, and endless drills. They knew the truth. Horus was coming. And in that dread knowledge, humanity revealed both its strength and its weakness. Cults spread in the underhives, preaching salvation through chaos. Riots broke out in the hab blocks, suppressed with brutal efficiency by arbites and Imperial army enforcers. Yet at the same time, acts of staggering devotion occurred. Workers laboring until death to complete fortifications. Guardsmen swearing oaths to hold their ground until their blood watered the palace walls. Children reciting prayers to the Emperor with voices steadier than their parents. Even among the Astartes, tension grew. The White Scars, led by Jagatai Khan, hovered between loyalty and independence, unsure if they could reach Terra in time. The Ultramarines, trapped behind the ruin storm, were cut off from their Emperor's call. The Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard licked their wounds, broken but unbowed. All knew the final battle loomed, but few could be certain who would reach it. For Horus was not rushing. He was patient. Every world he burned weakened the Imperium. Every delay bled loyalist strength dry. He gathered not only armies, but momentum, ensuring that when his fleet finally appeared in the Sol system, it would be with the inevitability of doom itself. The galaxy held its breath. Terra braced for impact, and in the silence of the Golden Throne, the Emperor did not stir. The siege was near, and nothing could stop it now. The storm is almost here, friends. If you can feel the weight of it pressing down, drop a like to keep the beacon of this channel alight, and comment, do you believe the siege could ever have been avoided, or was it written from the start?
The walls of the Imperial Palace burned, but they did not fall quietly. For weeks, the Loyalists had bled in the dust of Terra. Entire districts of the throne world had been reduced to ash and rubble, their ruins now nothing more than killing grounds. Every street, every collapsed hab block, every scorched temple became a trench or redoubt, each one paid for in oceans of blood. The traitor advance was measured in meters, not miles, but still, it never ceased. The angel was everywhere. Sanguinius fought as though he bore the weight of the entire Imperium on his shoulders, and perhaps he did. His white wings shone through the smoke, a beacon amid ruin, as he stood against World-Eater berserkers who charged him 10 at a time. With the blade encarmine, he cut them down, each stroke a hymn of defiance. Blood fountained across his armor, crimson upon white, and his legion followed him with unshakable faith. For the Blood Angels, the sight of their Primarch aloft in battle was enough to banish despair, if only for another hour. They called him the Angel at the Gate. Wherever the traitors pushed hardest, wherever walls crumbled and defenses threatened to break, Sanguinius descended. He fought titans, leaping from their backs as he split their power cores with sweeps of his blade.
He cut through demons whose forms twisted the eyes, slaying horrors of the warp with a light born of the Emperor himself. To the traitors, his presence was a curse. To the loyalists, it was hope incarnate. But hope was not enough to hold forever. The World Eaters poured into the cracks, their chain axes shrieking as they butchered civilians and Astartes alike. The Death Guard advanced unstoppably, spreading rot through the very walls they battered. Entire bastions became festering charnel pits, their defenders drowned in plague. The word-bearers summoned ever more demonic reinforcements, so that reality itself groaned and tore, spilling the stuff of nightmares into the palace's courtyards. Rogel Dorn, his armor cracked and bloodied, fought not just with blade but with voice. He commanded the Imperial fists with ruthless precision, every counterstrike executed like clockwork. "You are the wall," he thundered from the battlements, his voice carrying even above the roar of macro-cannon fire. "And the wall does not yield." His words held crumbling lines together. Entire companies of mortal soldiers found new strength beneath his gaze, even as the ground trembled beneath traitor titans. Yet though Dorn fought like stone itself, he knew the truth. The palace could not hold indefinitely. Each day cost tens of thousands of lives. Each breach was sealed with flesh and prayer. Each defense line fell back closer and closer to the Sanctum Imperialis, where the Golden Throne sat silent. The Khan carved a path of speed and fury across the battlefield. The White Scars roared through shattered streets, their jet bikes slicing through Death Guard formations, their blades flashing like lightning. Jehatai himself struck at the word-bearers, cutting down their dark priests before they could finish summoning greater demons. He fought with a savage joy, but even he could see the balance tilting. For every 100 demons slain, 1,000 more poured through. For every tank burned, another dozen thundered into place. Above it all, the skies burned. Traitor fleets unleashed bombardments even as their warriors advanced, reducing the palace walls to glowing slag. Orbital strikes turned loyalist positions to glass. The atmosphere itself grew toxic with ash, smoke, and blood. The sun of Terra, once brilliant, was a dim smear through clouds of fire. And yet still, the angel endured. There was one moment, a moment whispered about later by survivors, when a breach in the Eternity Gate opened wide. Sons of Horus Terminators surged forward, their storm bolters roaring, their chain fists tearing into steel and bone alike. It seemed certain the gate would be lost, and with it the sanctum beyond. But then the angel descended. Sanguinius struck like a meteor, his wings spread wide, his blade flashing in the storm. He stood alone against an entire company of Horus's chosen warriors, and he did not yield. One by one he felled them, his bloodied form gleaming in the firelight. When at last the breach was sealed, the angel still stood, his armor broken, his face pale, but his spirit unbroken. Whispers spread across the palace. "The angel will not fall," men and women told each other in blood-smeared whispers. "While he stands, Terra stands." But deep within the void, aboard the vengeful spirit, Horus waited. And though his legions battered the walls, the War Master was not yet satisfied. He knew the siege alone would not end the war. He needed something more. He needed the Emperor's attention. The angel at the gate had bought time, but time was not infinite. The storm is almost at its peak. If this vision grips your imagination, strike the subscribe button. For the final duel approaches.
The walls of Terra groaned under the weight of betrayal. Smoke choked the skies, blood drowned the earth, and the very air was thick with warp stench. The imperial palace, fortress of humanity's greatest dream, stood battered but not yet broken. But Horus had grown impatient. The War Master, once the brightest son of the Emperor, understood that even with all his legions, even with the Chaos gods at his back, victory through siege alone could take years. The Emperor's defenses, guided by Dawn's genius and Sanguinius's divine presence, would not collapse easily. And so Horus made a choice, the choice the gods whispered to him in dreams. He lowered the shields of the vengeful spirit, daring the Emperor to come. It was bait, and it was the only way the war could end. The Loyalists saw the trap, and yet they also saw the necessity. Dawn raged at the thought of leaving the palace, his walls still crumbling under constant assault. Jahantai Khan urged boldness, his white scars thirsting to strike. But it was Sanguinius, angel of Baal, who understood the truth. The Emperor could not fight both the galaxy and his wayward son forever. The War Master had to be confronted. Thus the Emperor gathered his strength. With him came Dawn, his Stonewall's son, Malkador the Sigillite, weary but unbowed, and Sanguinius, whose wings still carried light amidst ruin. The custodian guard formed an honor guard of gold and fire, their halberds gleaming like suns. The chosen struck for the vengeful spirit. The corridors of the War Master's flagship were not steel alone, but living nightmare. The ship pulsed with warp energy, its bulkheads twisted into obscene architecture of bone and sinew. Daemons clawed at reality, shrieking hymns to the dark gods. Whole squads of custodians and space marines perished simply holding the way open, their blood sanctifying each chamber as they fell. The Emperor walked at the center, his presence burning away demonic filth, his golden light steady, even as chaos screamed. And then, Sanguinius found himself alone. Perhaps it was the will of the gods, or perhaps it was the Emperor's own grim design. The angel stood in the throne chamber of the vengeful spirit, and before him, Horus waited. The War Master's armor was monstrous, fused with the blessings of the ruinous powers. His eyes burned like suns gone mad. His voice was thunder as he greeted his brother, not with joy, but with contempt. They clashed. The duel was apocalyptic. Blade met claw, wings met fury. Sanguinius fought with all the radiance of his father's light, each strike singing with purity. Horus struck with godlike strength, his blows cracking the deck plates of the ship itself. The angel's foresight, his cursed visions of this very moment, hung over every motion. He knew he could not win, and yet he fought anyway. For a time the angel stood as humanity's final hope. He cut through Horus's guard, even wounding Horus, driving his blade into corrupted flesh. But chaos had remade Horus into something more than a Primarch. He was no longer just the Emperor's son, he was the herald of ruin. With a final crushing blow, Horus broke Sanguinius. The angel fell, his white wings torn, his blood soaking the floor of the vengeful spirit. And then the Emperor arrived. The chamber blazed with his presence, golden radiance filling every shadow. He beheld his fallen son, Horus triumphant and Sanguinius broken. What passed between them cannot be fully known. Some say Horus mocked him, others say the Emperor pleaded one final time for his son to return. What is certain is that their clash shook reality itself. The duel of father and son was not merely physical. Warp lightning burned through the void. The Emperor wielded power no mortal eye could endure, his every strike born of both infinite sorrow and boundless might. Horus met him blow for blow, his strength fed by the gods of chaos, his ambition towering. They fought across eternity in the span of moments. Custodians who glimpsed the battle died with their eyes melted from their skulls. The ship itself screamed as reality tore. Humanity's fate balanced on the edge of each strike. And at last, Horus faltered. For a heartbeat his weakness showed, whether in doubt, in pride, or in overreach. None could say. The Emperor struck not with hesitation, but with the terrible finality of necessity. The War Master's body was annihilated, his soul unmade, his rebellion ended. The victory was hollow. The Emperor lay broken upon the floor, mortally wounded by the battle, his physical form ruined. Dorn, arriving moments too late, wept as he beheld the ruin. Malcador was gone, consumed by his sacrifice upon the throne. Sanguinius lay still, his body cold. But even in death, the angel's face was peaceful, for in falling, he had given the Emperor the chance to strike. The Emperor was borne back to Terra, his shattered body interred upon the golden throne. The heresy was over, but the cost was immeasurable. Horus was gone, but so too was the dream of unity. In its place rose the Imperium as we know it, an empire of sacrifice, faith, and endless vigilance. The galaxy burned, but humanity endured, and on Terra, the Emperor sat in eternal silence, his light flickering, yet unyielding. Still with me in the fire? Comment below, what do you think burned brighter in those final moments, Horus's fury or the Emperor's sorrow?
The Horus Heresy ended as it was always destined to. Not with victory, but with ruin. Terra survived, the Emperor endured, and the traitors were cast into the warp. Yet the dream of the Great Crusade died in the fires of the vengeful spirit. What had begun as a march toward unity ended in civil war, a brother's hand raised against brother, father against son, and the gods of chaos laughing across eternity. The Imperium that followed was no longer a vision of progress. It was an empire of survival. The Emperor's silence upon the golden throne became both the foundation of faith and the greatest wound of all. His light, flickering through the Astronomicon, still guides humanity, but it is not the same radiant presence that once walked among his children. The War Master was dead, but his rebellion left scars that will never heal. For the Space Marines who survived, their legions were shattered, sundered into smaller chapters to prevent another rebellion. The angel Sanguinius became a martyr, his sacrifice immortalized in every blood angel's heart. Rogel Dorn stood grim and unbowed, a living bastion, even as grief carved hollows into his soul. Jagatai Khan vanished into the stars, pursuing foes into the warp itself, his fate uncertain. The wolves, the ravens, the scars and the fists all bore wounds they would never escape. And yet, humanity endures. That is the cruel miracle of the 41st millennium. Even in the shadow of gods and monsters, ordinary men and women still take up las guns, still dig trenches, still die in their millions, all so that the Imperium may last one more day.